Final Fantasy began in 1987 as a basic Japanese RPG for the Nintendo. What started life 25 years ago as a game inspired by Dragon Warrior has become a global phenomenon with a fan base well into the millions. The series has become known for its intriguing stories, memorable characters, unique gameplay, and probably its strongest selling point, its music. As we begin 2013, we look back on what's made this series so good. Join us as we celebrate 25 years of Final Fantasy right here on Downloadable Content. Happy New Year. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 1 of Downloadable Content. I am Brian, and with me on this episode we have Shanna.
Hello, hello, hello.
And Ron.
Hi, everyone.
Long time no see. My God, it's been a while.
Yeah, no kidding. What happened in the past 6 months? Did the Mayan apocalypse happen or something?
Well, Dick Clark died, and I thought that was going to be the end of the world. And, I was actually, to be perfectly honest, I was half expecting, as the countdown was going on New Year's Eve, I was half expecting the ghost of Dick Clark to rise out of the ground, a la Ghostbusters, and stop the ball from dropping.
Seacrest cannot replace me.
Yeah. I've come for your souls, that sort of thing. But that didn't happen. But no, Series 2 ended up getting truncated because I got sick, and then school happened, But even though...
Life. What is this thing people call life?
I know. Life. Don't talk to me about life. But, yeah, that's what happened. But even though I'm still doing the school thing, I have a slightly less course load heading into the spring semester, so I actually do have time to do some of these episodes. So, as I mentioned in the intro, we begin by discussing Final Fantasy. It just turned 25. It turned 25 on December 17th.
It can rent a car.
Yes, it can. And drive down what? The ruined streets of Midgar?
Good point. Well, you can drive out of Balam.
You could, but I mean, this episode we're talking about the first 6 games. We don't have vehicles yet, except for the airship. But
well, they actually have the max, so I guess you can make it a town.
I guess, but whatever the case. So here we are, Final Fantasy, 25 years. I feel old.
Ditto.
But we're here. We're going to discuss the first 6 games, all of them released for the Nintendo. We're going to wax nostalgia all over the place. It could get a little messy.
It could.
And just for you people out there who are anal about spoilers and things like that, there will be moments where we probably are going to give some bits of plot. I mean, all of these games, the first 6 games, are all Nintendo, Super Nintendo games, so I think the statute of limitations has expired on spoilers. So, that's my rant. So don't complain. You have been warned.
I wonder if it's feasible for the internet to have, like, a statute of spoilertations. Like, how many years out before you can drop info?
I saw somebody on Facebook actually having an argument about that very idea. It was in relation to a recent TV show.
Mm-hmm.
And, there was people complaining, oh, you spoiled this and spoiled that. I'm like, it's the internet. What is this?
Mm-hmm.
Personally speaking, I tried to, 7 years roughly? Depending on like how popular the particular media object is.
Fair enough. Everyone has their own standards, but we're going to start with the first game, released 25 years ago. Final Fantasy I was released in Japan for a system called the Famicom, also known as the NES, December 17th, 1987. It wouldn't make it over here for another 3 years. And it was created by Hironobu Sakaguchi. He is the man who is credited with inventing the series. He created the series, and now he's gone. He went off, he left Square, he did his own thing. And by now, we've all probably have heard the story about how Final Fantasy I came to be, but if you haven't, let's indulge you. Back in 1987, we had this little video game company called Square, and they weren't doing too well. However, the creator, Sakaguchi, had decided to make a game, and had it not done well, he would have left the games industry. Contrary to popular belief, it was been widely thought that if this game didn't do well, Square would actually go under. That's not the case. It was Sakaguchi who said that if this game didn't do well, he was going to leave the games industry and go back to school and do something else with his life.
I mean, to be fair, beforehand, Square you did mostly like PC and Mac games, correct? This was their first real foray into the home console business.
Yeah, Square actually was initially reluctant to get into consoles. But they decided to give it a try, and the rest is history. So, have both of you played the first Final Fantasy?
Oh, yes, and it hurt.
Yes. I played and beaten it. Granted, I did not play the original NES version. I played the PS1.
The Final Fantasy Origins release?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what I played, and that's what I think I beat it on that, although I may have also beaten it on the Game Boy Advance version as well. I'm not sure.
Oh, Final Fantasy that's how I played it, was on Origins, because Final Fantasy II, that was its first release into the US, was in that collection.
Yeah.
Well, you guys were nicer to yourselves. I went full balls to the wall and played the emulator NES version.
How do you like not having the auto select for your characters?
I don't know, just about as much as I like the whole, is that what you're talking about? The whole thing where like you hit an enemy and it dies and then you just hit air?
Yes.
That's what you meant by auto. Yeah. That was fun. A whole waste of a turn, and then another whole waste of a turn, and then another.
Especially if you're using Magic, because I think Magic did not auto-select either.
Oh yeah, I mean...
Yeah, Magic did too.
I mean, for the Final Fantasy Origins re-release, they fixed that and put in the auto-select. What we mean is, the convention in RPGs where if you focus your entire party's attacks on one enemy, you kill them, then the game will automatically pick another enemy to attack. That wasn't the case in the original NES version. If you had, your party of 4, and you all decided to attack one enemy, once that enemy was killed, if your party still had moves left, they would attack that same spot, resulting in misses, because you were then hitting nothing but air. The game did not choose another enemy to randomly attack. So, yeah, frustration.
Not to mention the insanely high random encounter rate sometimes.
Oh yeah, it was like 4 versus 9. Like, take a step, battle. Take another step, battle. Oh yeah.
And it wasn't even like... I mean, sometimes it was that bad, but most of it was just also the fact that the dungeons in the later stages were unnecessarily long.
I actually think that's a hallmark of this series. I mean, it's final dungeons in the Final Fantasy series are notoriously long.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about the final dungeons. I'm talking like the water temple and then the air temple. I remember being very long.
Oh yes.
And having really high encounter rates.
And I think, if I remember correctly, the only places you could save at were inns.
You could save it in...
I think you could save on the map, too, right?
I don't think map save was there yet. I think you only save ends.
Well, then let us consult Lord Wikipedia. In the meantime, I remember in Final Fantasy Origins, you had the wonderful thing called the memo save, or the quick save, which saved your ass many times.
It also came useful for people who were quote-unquote save scumming.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you know, when I think about it, yeah, since I played it on an emulator, I totally save stated. I cheated, so... now that I think about it, I don't remember if I saved on the map. Maybe I didn't.
Oops.
Oopsie.
Well, like, there was a little bug with the PS1 and the Game Boy Advance versions, because with the quick save, if you move like 2 or 3 steps forward, quick save, then reset, it would reset your random encounter rate. So in theory, you could go through like the temples in the end game like without hitting almost anything.
Point to clarify: you could only save on the world map if you used a tent or a cabin.
Ah, that's how it worked. Okay.
Yeah, because I remember in Final Fantasy Origins, that was your only way to save. You could only save at inns. So any time your character had to rest up overnight to restore their HP was where you could save, because there were no save points in dungeons.
Yeah.
Which made life extra hard.
Oh yeah. I mean, I remember a certain degree of frustration. Especially...
Now, one thing I also remember, in like, you know, this was actually pre-Gil. Like, you actually had gold in this game, in Final Fantasy 1.
I think you're right.
Which is convention. Mm-hmm.
I think you're right.
Yeah, it was gold, though. It was not Gil. Although I think they abbreviated it to G. But I think if you read the manual, it was gold and not Gil.
Well, keep in mind, Final Fantasy I was very largely inspired by Dragon Warrior, which had come out a year before.
And
right.
before that, you look at the spell system, that's very Phoenician Dungeons and Dragons magic.
Yes, I mean, Final Fantasy I was also definitely with the magic that you only could do a certain amount of spells per level. That was definitely right out of the D&D handbook.
And that was going to be my chicken or the egg question, was which came first, but that just got answered for me. So, okay.
Final Fantasy I also introduced some things that we are all familiar with the series, like character classes. Each character had a unique character class that had their own strengths and weaknesses. Like the fighter, for example, he was the strongest physically, but couldn't do a damn worth of magic. The white mage, black mage, they were typically your weakest characters, but they had very powerful magic. Red mage, which could do a little bit of everything.
That's my favorite.
There's two more classes. Thief, I remember being slightly weaker than the fighter, but I think he could dual wield or something or other. Or that he could steal.
Yeah, the thief can steal.
Yeah, so thief can steal. Then what does the monk do?
You had fighter, thief, black belt, red mage, white mage, black mage. Those were your 6 classes.
Yeah, then what does the black belt do? Because I don't remember him being particularly noteworthy at all. Maybe the fact that his fists don't really need to use weapons?
Yeah, he didn't need weapons, and I think... Could you hit for 2 damage? You know, for double the damage, or is that just in 5?
Let's see. Barehanded fighting. Dum-de-dum-de-dum. Yeah, I think they were just predominantly barehanded fighters. But I don't remember, because it has been literally years since I've played the first game.
Yeah, I think the only benefit to the black belt was that he didn't need weapons, so you could save a little bit of money when you geared up your party, but the trade-off, I think, to that was definitely not worth it.
So we had that, and we also had, we did not have a Chocobo or character Sid in this first game.
That's why I named one of my characters Sid. I didn't think it was right.
We had our simple turn-based battle system. That would remain the case for the first 3 games. There was also the optional side quest where you could upgrade your character classes.
Forgot about that.
If you found the rat's tail for Bahamut, you could upgrade for, fighter to knight. Your black mages would be. All your.
The mages would go to wizards, I think.
Yep.
Thief would become ninja, I want to say. And then black belt would turn into
something.
Something, yeah. Maybe straight up monk.
But we had all of those fun. Let's see. I'm trying to remember what I remember most about the Final Fantasy 1. The 4 fiends.
And just the idea of the 4 elements that's been present in the series
crystals.
for so long. The crystals of
Yes.
each element.
The crystals, which still continue. The idea of the crystals, even all the way to the 13, still uses that. So.
The airship is also in 1. Is there a sub in 1? Don't you take a sub down to the water dungeon?
I don't remember. It's been a long time.
Yeah, let's again. Dum-de-dum-de-dum-de-dum.
It may not be a sub itself, but I think it was an underwater submersible that was in the shape of a barrel.
I do remember the airship. I knew that. Let's see, I'm looking at the plot here. Let's see. A kind gesture is repaid by a fairy receiving special liquid that produces oxygen, and the warriors use to help defeat the water fiend.
That's so they can breathe underwater and walk around.
Yep. It's not like Sonic, where, he dies after 30 seconds.
Jump for bubbles.
Yeah.
Jump for bubbles.
Yeah, there's no panic music. And, of course, you had the story revolving around the time paradox involving Garland and Chaos.
Yeah.
Told completely via text.
Well, yes. That would be the case for almost all the games. There was a lot of reading involved.
Yeah. Wait, there's something else in 1 too that stuck out. I'm trying to remember what it was.
I remember the final boss, Chaos, had a very, very whopping 4,000 HP.
4,000. Wowie, wow, wow.
But, when each hit is only doing a few hundred.
I guess that's true. That's enough to make your palm sweat.
I think the Excalibur could be used by every character.
No, there was this one particular move that I think the White Mage had called... it was either the White Mage had Steel, S-T-E-E-L, as in the metal, which really buffed the Knight's physical stats to the point where he was taking out over 1,000 HP, and you could defeat the boss in 5 hits.
Yeah. But I remember, one of the weapons that you get at the end game, it might be Excalibur or Ragnarok or something like that, but it's a weapon that every class can use. Doesn't matter what class it is, it could be a freaking Black Mage can equip Excalibur.
Why would you want to give a Black Mage that? Their strength stat is pitiful.
I know, but it was just more so the argument's sake, I think.
It's like, wait a minute.
Now let's see if he can actually lift Excalibur. Ah!
For crying out...
It's too heavy.
For crying out loud, the White Mage, all you have to do is blow on her toe and she's dead.
Yeah. That's also... I think we call that a staple of RPGs for many years to come.
Yeah, it wasn't just Final Fantasy. That's a standard of JRPGs anyway.
Yeah.
Where your female characters are always the weakest. But
That's true, because that was the only female character you could have was a White Mage at that point.
Of course, we have Nobu Uematsu. We have, the score. And even then, I think a couple of the tunes that stick out the most from Final Fantasy One, the battle theme.
Oh yeah.
Battle theme, the
Victory
intro
theme.
music, the victory theme. You have the intro music, which is I think it's called the Crystal theme.
Or the prelude, either one.
Depending on how you look at it.
The battle theme. Matoya's Cave actually is one of my favorites.
She's the blind witch, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll have to look that song up. I don't remember how it goes right now. The battle theme sticks out in my head, like, right there, though.
Oh, yes. I mean, it's been covered by the Black Mages. It's all over Overclock Remix. It's all over the place. And when this game was made, Square requested that to make 400,000 copies. They all sold, which then set up the sequel, which Final Fantasy II, on a personal level, is one of my least liked games. And you're about to find out why. Moving on into Final Fantasy II, it was released exactly 1 year later in Japan. It was released December 17th, 1988 for the NES. It would not see anywhere outside of Japan until 2003. And there's a reason for that, which I only recently found out after doing research on these games. The reason why both Final Fantasy II and III never came out in the States was because Final Fantasy I took so long to translate and localize for the States. So by the time Final Fantasy I came out in the United States, which was 1990, the Super Nintendo was about to come out, and so Square decided to abandon the idea and devote their resources to making games for the Super Nintendo.
That would also end up being badly translated.
Yes.
Well, keep in mind too that there's a unique disadvantage, specifically with the NES and the SNES, when you do localization. The Japanese alphabet, essentially, the hiragana and katakana, their language essentially is much shorter than the English language. So it may only take them 2 or 3 symbols to say a word, whereas in English you have to do anywhere from 3 to 10 letters. So you run into an issue with the
Space.
The space, because remember the NES and the SNES are only like 16 megabytes and 64 megabytes respectively, I think.
Good point.
So yeah, I mean, there were definitely a lot of issues with translation, and you're right. I mean, in Japanese, all you need is, maybe a few symbols to get an entire sentence in. And that was the case. It was a lot of work to localize the case. So Final Fantasy II and III never got released in the States. So what ended up being Final Fantasy II in the United States was in actuality Final Fantasy IV, and we'll get to that clusterfuck in a little bit. But Final Fantasy II, there were reasons why I loathed this game. This game was not fun. This game was work. I got very little enjoyment out of this game. For starters, they abandoned the traditional leveling up by gaining experience points and for things like that, so they instead made their character improvement possible by leveling up individual stats. What I mean is this. The more often you use something in battle, the more of a chance it's going to level up. So if you are a character that predominantly uses physical attacks, your strength will go up over the course of the game. If you're a magic user, your MP will go up over the course of the game.
So your characters don't come with class systems. Is that how it works? Because I haven't played it too.
Yes.
Yeah,
that is basically how it worked. Every character was a blank slate. Now, they may have particular inclinations for one or the other based on how their initial stat is. If memory serves, the female characters generally started with less HP and more MP, while the male characters started with more HP and less MP.
Yes.
But you could, in theory, shift it so that the guys were the mages and the girls were the warriors.
Yes, that it was possible to do that, and you had something on the order of, like, if you didn't use a particular ability, then that stat would drop.
Yeah. Also keep in mind, too, that this tied to HP. So if you wanted to get your characters more health, they had to take damage.
Yes, that was one of the more annoying things about the battle system, that if you wanted to see... If your characters wanted to increase your HP, your characters would have to take a lot of damage and be continually at low health.
It was, like... If you read strategy guides for Final Fantasy II, they generally recommend specific points in the game where you do nothing but level your character's stats for 3 or 4 hours.
At a time?
Yeah, I remember there being 3 or 4 specific points where if you read a guide, they literally say, okay, stop, level your characters.
Oh my god. And it sounds like you can't even, like, just say, okay, I'm going to take some time and, like, you know, just go and level up and do it. Like, you have to focus on each little pinpoint and status of your character.
Yeah,
exactly.
It was entirely
it's almost
stat-driven.
It's too focused, it sounds like.
Yeah, like, more often than not, when you want to level up a character's stats, you would have to walk around with half HP, almost no MP. You would have to injure yourself most of the time to try and maybe get an increase in HP or defense. And the few spells you did cast, it'd have to be very cheap and, like, maybe a cure or something like that, so that you could, in theory, get more MP or more spirit or more magic or whatever it was.
Yeah, it was very, very stat-driven, and, you know, I found this to be work. You know, I don't mind level grinding. Hell, I'm a Dragon Quest veteran, for Christ's sakes. I don't mind level grinding. But to be constantly in a state of near death and only to level up your HP and MP was annoying. It was very, very annoying. And so, by the time I got to the end of the game, I was just so frustrated that I almost cheated. There's a particular weapon in Final Fantasy II called the Blood Sword.
Oh.
Sounds metal.
Ron knows exactly where I'm going with this. The Blood Sword was a particular nasty weapon that, on the character that you equipped it, it dropped their HP tremendously. But in return, the strength you got to compensate was amazing. And it was one of those weapons that took something like 9999 out of the boss, out of the final boss. This was like the only thing the final boss was completely vulnerable to. And so I'm like, you know what? Fuck it. I do not want to spend this final boss battle traditionally hacking and grinding away. I want this over. And so 3 hits, done. Like, that's it. I've had enough. This was work.
Yeah. The Blood Sword, it has appeared in other games too, in other Final Fantasies, but I think this was the first appearance of it, and it was definitely, I think, more than anything, it might have been a weapon that they put in as a concession to be like, okay, maybe just in case if we did this thing wrong, here's something that'll make it a little bit easier for you.
Oh, it was just, oh my god. However, even though I'm ragging on it, and deservedly so, maybe that's why it never saw the light of day outside of Japan until 2003, but regardless, you have to admit that if you remember the story at all, it was definitely a more involved story than the first game. It involved some orphans and some people who were being oppressed by, you know, the Emperor. I was say,
wasn't it a resistance story where the orphans, they were in a village, the village got attacked, they joined the resistance movement to fight the Emperor, and then that tumbled out of control from there.
Basically, it was Final Fantasy Star Wars Episode 4.
Which is basically a trope of the Final Fantasy series, let's be honest.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
There's always rebellions and there's always orphans.
Always. Always orphans. No one has any parentage. They're all dead. Final Fantasy II, however, did introduce to us the Chocobo.
Quark.
Oh, that was weird. Jinx.
I owe you one soda.
It also introduced a character, Sid, who, wouldn't you know, he owned an airship.
Did he have goggles too?
Let me look at the character art.
No, I think he had a sword.
He wasn't playable. I know that.
Yeah, he was not playable. I think the first playable Sid is in 4.
He was definitely. He was definitely not playable. But I gotta look up the game art. Let's see Sid for Final Fantasy II. No, he did not have glasses.
Surprising.
He was a very wealthy man. You know, he owned an airship because, he was rich and cool and
hip.
Uh-huh. He's according to the Final Fantasy compendiums, Sid was the creator and owner of the world's only airship. He gives rides for overblown charges. Much later in the game, after an attack, he gives the plane to the heroes with his dying breath.
Aww.
I know. How awesome is that? But Final Fantasy II, like I said, it became work. It was the reason why it was the last Final Fantasy game I had played. I'd started 2 after I finished 1, and I went, oh dear, this is going to piss me off. Another game. And that other game, well, it would be a different game, but we're going to move into Final Fantasy III!
Another one with orphans.
You know, how about those orphans? And children, too, at that.
Yeah, they are 10 years old, if memory serves.
Oh, they're young. They're young. It was released April 1990 in Japan for the NES. It would not come out here until 2006 on the DS.
That's the version I have, the DS version.
It was the first time it was released outside of Japan. And it introduced something that I think was a nice addition to the series, the job class system, where you could change character classes on the fly.
Allowed for customization.
Immense customization.
Yeah. I think probably one of the more important contributions to the series in general, and probably RPGs as well, because you see this carry over in various other games.
Yep, I know it definitely carried over into 5.
With a vengeance in 5. We'll get into that.
Yes, but, I actually loved the fact that, this was you could customize. Your characters were not set into character classes from the start of the game. You could, customize your character.
Well, they all start as, memory serves,
Onion Knight.
Well, not. I think the Onion Knight is what they eventually can turn into, but they start off as a quote-unquote commoner. And it's only after you get the very last crystal that they get the quote-unquote upgrade from commoner to Onion Knight.
I think I'm gonna have to look. I thought you started off as the Onion Knight.
I think in the original 3 you start off as an Onion Knight. In the DS version they were commoners.
Yes.
Okay, maybe that's where I'm getting mixed up as.
Let's see. Setting characters. Yeah, Final Fantasy III focuses around 4 orphans, each of them starting off as Onion Knights in the original game, but they start off as freelancers.
Right, okay.
In the DS version.
Okay.
The DS version also improved on the original by giving them unique appearances, backstories, names, and individual personalities.
That's true. Because, there was, I remember there's actually a whole intro scene where you meet the first character and he, falls into a cave and Or, I mean, that happens in the original, but it wasn't just a random onion knight. It was like an actual kid.
Yep. So, this was also the first game in the series to have unique battle commands to particular character classes. You know, for the first time, they didn't all have this all the same type of commands. Like, for example, Steal, which is the Thieves and the Thieves only. Jump, which is the Dragoons and Dragoons only. The Thief had the ability to open doors and passages that would otherwise require a special key. It's also the first game to feature summons.
Yay, bring on the summons.
I mean, we had monsters of that caliber. I mean, Bahamut was in the first game, but this was the first game where you could actually use summon creatures. So, yay, yes indeed.
Now, were all the classic summons in 3? Because I don't remember. I don't think I had summons when I played.
I think, my knowledge is coming from the DS version, so I don't know if this was in the NES version or not.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm asking, because I never played the original NES version.
Yeah, I imagine like most of us here have played the DS version, not the original. But I believe you had Ramu, Ifrit, Shiva, Odin, Bahamut, and Leviathan.
The basics.
I think that's it.
Yeah, you had just the basics. It didn't go, crazy with the summons. It was just your basics ones.
Now, this is also the first one I remember to have another strange Final Fantasy trope that I found, which kind of goes unrecognized, but this is also the first one to have the random dancing girls in the inns. At least that I remember.
Was it the first? I thought that was 4, but
I could have sworn 2 had dancing girls.
Okay, so we're all over the place. But yes,
4 for certain. I remember there being some in 3. I could have sworn there was an inn and 2 that had dancing girls.
Also, Shanna, just for you, Final Fantasy III was the first one in the series to have the auto-target feature in battle.
Oh, thank God.
So for the first 2, at least for the first 2 originals for the NES, you had to actually plan where your attacks were going to land. 3 was the first one where they went, auto-target, alright.
I can't tell you how, especially because it was so jarring, because when I played 1, I played it after playing 7 and 4 and a bunch of other ones. So I was like, wait, what's going on? Why do I keep hitting space? It didn't click at first, and I was like, oh, so they didn't program that in yet on the first one.
No.
No, they did not.
No. I'm sorry, no. This also has, if you guys remember, this was the first Final Fantasy to feature what I also call a very annoying trope, in which your main antagonist is not the final boss.
See, I kind of like that trope.
I don't, because you spend all game getting angry at this particular villain.
Well, I mean...
And then you beat him, and then some other piece of shit comes in that you have no time to build up any hatred for.
I kind of wonder about that, whether this trope begins in 3 or not. I remember the final boss in 2 is the Emperor.
Yes.
I don't know if I want to call Chaos and Garland one and the same, because they feel like very different people altogether.
Well, Garland transforms into Chaos.
I don't know about that.
It's kind of like Garland goes all Resident Evil and mutates.
Yeah, but even then, I still don't know if I want to call that the same character. I do agree this is a trope that's introduced in 3, and probably is one that shouldn't be used as often as it is.
I mean, in Final Fantasy III, the main antagonist, his name is Xande, Xande.
Uh-huh.
And he is the antagonist for pretty much the entire game. And then after you beat him, the story says that he's actually only just a pawn for the final boss, who was the Cloud of Darkness.
Well, I guess it's kind of like, it's the Shyamalan effect, you know what I mean? Where it's like, after you see that happen in so many games, you come to expect it a bit, and the surprise isn't as shocking. It's like, what a twist.
Oh no. But that really annoyed the hell out of me. It didn't, that happening in Final Fantasy III didn't annoy me as it did in Final Fantasy IX, but that's next episode.
Wait. Now, did they introduce more story in 3 on the DS version, or did the NES version have the same amount of story as the DS version?
Not having played the NES version, I couldn't tell you.
Okay. Because I remember okay, so maybe listeners can correct me on this, but wasn't it the point that the Cloud of Darkness was the... Like the orphans are the quote-unquote light warriors, and the Cloud of Darkness is the quote-unquote dark warriors, only they're sick and tired of this light-dark cycle, and just want to say, fuck it, let's unmake the universe?
Sort of, yes. Let's see. The four warriors eventually arrive at the Crystal Tower. They discover that the Cloud of Darkness is the source of recent events. The Cloud attempts to bring back similar situation as the Flood of Light a millennia earlier, so that the world is pulled into the void. The warriors from the Light travel into the domain of the Dark Crystals to free the imprisoned Dark Warriors. So the Light and the Dark Warriors team up to defeat the Cloud of Darkness, therefore restoring the crystals and balance to the world. And, that's your game.
Yeah.
And, game, set, and match. But that's Final Fantasy III. I like the fact that they actually, when it was going to be released in the US, they decided to give the game a 3D makeover. That was nice.
Yeah. Who did the 3D makeover? Because they've also done the makeover for Final Fantasy IV, and they also do the Game Boy Advance ports as well?
Well, let's see. The ones who developed the 3D remake for 3, and I think 4 did this. Matrix Software.
Yeah. I think that was them. Sounds right.
And also in Final Fantasy IV, the remake, they added some voice acting.
Yeah.
Which made it 10 times more fun.
Yeah. And that is where we're going to get to next. Final Fantasy IV is the first game for the Super Nintendo. It makes the jump from the 18-bit era to the 16-bit era, and whoa, is it a landmark title. That is going to be in our second half. We're going to discuss 4, 5, and 6, all of the Super Nintendo games at length. But for now, you're going to get some music. We're going to cut out and ride some chocobos for a few minutes. And we will be back on the second half of our Final Fantasy Retrospective Episode 1 right here on Downloadable Content.